After some heavy riding and abuse, bikes can start to feel a little bit rattly and clunky. So this is the checklist of things to have a look at if your bike isn't feeling quite as smooth as it used to. So let's start off with the wheels. Come down and crouch by your front wheel, grab your fork and give that wheel a wobble side to side. You shouldn't feel any movement in there. If there is, the first thing I would check is your wheel is installed correctly and everything is nice and tight. This might just be a quick release. On this fork, I actually need a 5mm Allen key to do this. If there is any movement in there, it could mean that your hub needs a bit of attention. The bearings might be worn out and that gives it that rattle, or sometimes the cones aren't adjusted properly. So take a look at that hub if you can feel that. Next thing to check is the spokes. So go around the wheel, squeezing them together, and they shouldn't move any more than a couple of millimeters as you're doing that. If they are moving, then you need to retension that front wheel. So you would feel your wheels moving around probably when you're riding if there was any movement in those cones or the bearings in your hub. So check the front wheel, then the back wheel, make sure they're not moving at all. After that, the headset. This is probably the most common cause of a bike that feels rattly and not very smooth. So the headset, these two big bearings that let you steer the bike, definitely check that. So grab your front brake and rock the bike forth and to the back, and you shouldn't feel any movement in there. So grab that headset cup back and forth, no movement. Again, I'll now grab the back brake, lift the front wheel up, and that should feel nice and smooth. If there is some movement in your headset, you need to undo the side bolts on your stem that pinch the stem onto the steerer tube, tighten down the top cap slightly until you get rid of that movement, and then redo up these pinch bolts, and you're ready to ride. If once you've done that, there is some friction in your headset bearings, then that either needs a service or needs replacing. Riding with a loose headset will actually make your bike feel really clunky. It can almost feel like your fork's about to snap off riding through rough stuff. It really doesn't feel nice. But actually something else that can feel very similar to that is when the DU bushes in your shock are worn. So let's check that next. There are bushes in either end of the shock and they help those bolts move around when the rear swing arm of the bike moves up, and the shock will twist ever so slightly. So they do wear out with time. So you need to check them. And the way to do that is grab a hold of the end of the shock, so you're touching the shock and the frame of your bike with your fingers, and now just pick up and push down. So you're just banging that back wheel into the floor, and you shouldn't feel any movement between the shock and the frame. That one feels good to me. Let's go up and do it on the other end as well. So I'm feeling the shock and the frame, and there's no movement in there, so I know my DU bushes are fine. If you do feel any movement here, first check that your bolts are nice and tight, and if they are, then it's time to replace those bushes. Next, we're going to go around the suspension on the bike and check for any rattles or clunks. So I'm going to start off with my fork, just pick the bar up and actually just slam the front wheel down into the floor. Should feel nice and controlled, no real clunks in there. If you can feel a little bit of something, next thing I would do is hold on to the stanchion and the lower and do a bit of the same thing. Use the front brake almost like you're checking your headset, rock it back and forth. There are bushes in here that can wear out with a bit of time, and that means that the lower and the stanchion are going to move a little bit in each other. So try and check for that. Bit like the headset, rock the bike back and forth. Should be no movement between the lower and the stanchion. So now down to the rear suspension. I'm going to grab my seat and my back wheel and give it a push and a pull, sort of doing this movement, see if there is any movement in the back end of my bike. Hopefully it won't be the wheel because I've checked the spokes and the hub already. So if it's not that and there is some movement, it will come down to the pivots in your rear suspension. That could be that they're not tight or the bearings are worn out again. So go around the bike, like I did with the rear shock as well, try and hold on to different parts of the frame as you're doing this, and you might be able to then target which one that is loose. The last major component I'm going to check is my cranks and also the bottom bracket. So I'm going to grab both cranks and wobble them sort of like this, side to side, make sure there's no movement in there and they're spinning nice and free. Any movement or clunking, you'll probably feel that through your feet. So that's the main components of the bikes checked. And to be honest, more often than not, it's either the headset or the rear shock bushings if you're riding a full suspension bike. If you've checked everything and you can still feel something's a bit rattly or loose, I would then go over and give the bike a full bolt check. And to be honest, that's something that you should be doing pretty regularly anyway. So there you go, there's a really quick and easy checklist to make sure your bike is running as smooth as possible. You might also want to try and make your bike as quiet as possible by stopping the chain slap and things like that. We've done a video on that, so click over there for that one. If you want to see the full tech playlist, you can learn how to look after your bike properly, click over there. Click on this GmbH logo to subscribe, it's totally free, and you get a mountain bike video every day of the year. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video.